Most foreigners never make it past the obvious spots in this country, but I did. This is my progressively off-the-radar Philippines route, from the well-known to, well, check out the rest. There are three main reasons people go to the Philippines: the beautiful beaches, the amazing tropical nature, and the Spanish colonial architecture. We went to the Philippines in January 2025. Well, when I say we, it's me and my wife Masha. And I just wanted to share our itinerary. Our trip lasted 23 days, and you can break up this itinerary into parts, and it will include all of the three main reasons. So let's go. But before you do, please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to this channel. It will really help me a lot because, you know, obviously I can't have a channel if I don't have subscribers. So anyway, so when you get to the country, the first place you're probably gonna end up in is gonna be Manila. Now, I don't like Manila. I don't think it's a safe city. I don't think it's a pleasant city, but it doesn't mean that there is nothing to see there. And one of the coolest parts of Manila is the Old Town, Intramuros, which literally means inside the walls. It literally means inside the walls. Intramuros is home to a couple of really beautiful churches now. The Philippines used to be a Spanish colony for the longest time, so most of the architecture that I was referring to, again, is going to be Spanish colonial architecture, and most of that architecture is going to be churches. One of these churches is a beautiful Manila cathedral, definitely worth exploring. Well, the other one is the St. Augustine Church, which is also a UNESCO heritage site. The St. Augustine Church definitely is exceptionally beautiful, especially on the inside. Unfortunately, we didn't make it inside because on the day we were there, it was closed, so we only got to see it from the outside. It's not the only place to visit when in Intramuros. There is also a really cool fort, which is Fort Santiago. There is quite a bit of history at that fort. It is originally a 16th century structure, but it was used by the British during British occupation. Then it was used by Americans during the American occupation. Then I believe it hosted Japanese troops during World War II. So there is a lot of things that happened on this site, and it's definitely worth seeing, aside from the fact that it's rather picturesque, and it's also located near the river there, so there is plenty of photo opportunities. Another thing I really like about Manila, by the way, is Makati. Makati is actually, I think technically speaking, it's a different town, but it's part of the Manila metro area, and Makati is generally the more upscale area of Manila. Like, a lot of the more wealthy people live here. And if you're visiting, it's one of the safer options around Manila, of course. And one of the places in Makati that I particularly liked is the filling station. It is a totally legit 1950s style American diner with some rock and roll music, some great burgers, and you can even sit inside of a Cadillac just like in Pulp Fiction. And it's just really cool that you can get this authentic American diner experience in the middle of the Philippines. After Manila, so we spent a few days here, after Manila we moved on to Palawan. Palawan is this kind of elongated island to the southwest of Manila. It is one of the most beautiful places in the country, probably one of the most beautiful islands I've ever been to in my life. If you're visiting the Philippines, this definitely should be on your list. We flew into Puerto Princesa. It's a medium-sized town. There is not too many things to see in the town proper, but just a short ways out of town, there is the subterranean river. It's like a 1.5 to 2 hours drive from there. We can take a tour, but we just did it ourselves. We took a car, and I have a video on how to do the Puerto Princesa subterranean river yourself without any tour guides, without any outside help. So why is it so cool? Because basically it's a massive cave with huge ceilings. I don't know, can you say ceiling about a cave? Let it be ceilings, all right? So it's very, very tall inside. It's absolutely massive. It's absolutely just humongous. You get this really interesting feeling when you're inside, despite the fact that you're kind of encircled by walls. You still feel really tiny because the cave is just so humongous. And there are a lot of really interesting rock formations, stalactites, etc. If you're a fan of caves, you will absolutely love this. And this is yet another UNESCO heritage site, of course. It's just worth mentioning, I guess. This is not the only thing to see around Puerto Princesa. Another thing that, we didn't do this, but another thing that I saw you can do is the fireflies. There's a couple of spots you can watch the fireflies at night. I've seen them in Sri Lanka before, that's why we didn't go here, but I'm sure it's going to be worth it if you do. There are a few mountains around, so some hiking opportunities, of course, but we just chose to go north to get to El Nido. Now, El Nido takes about 5 hours to get to. Again, we just drove there. The roads on Palawan are very nice, but I have a whole entire video dedicated to how to get around the Philippines. Check it out, it's right here. The whole experience is pretty thoroughly described in there. Now, El Nido. El Nido is this drop-dead gorgeous place. The karst rock formations are a pleasure to look at. They're absolutely extraordinary, unlike most landscapes out there. You know, there are very few places on Earth that look like this. Aside from the fact that there are gorgeous beaches around El Nido, one of them is the Las Habanas beach. That was a really cool one. And of course, you can take a boat to go island hopping. There are a lot of karst rock islands. You can go there, go kayaking, etc., etc. But my biggest problem with El Nido is just how touristy it is. Like, seriously, it's probably one of the most expensive places in the Philippines, and very often the locals are kind of spoiled by tourists. It may sometimes seem that you're not valued as a visitor, unlike the rest of the Philippines. We didn't really have a good experience at El Nido because of the hotel. We were treated, I don't know, we were treated kind of like garbage actually, so we didn't really like that. Judging by the reviews that I read, that's not a unique experience that we had. I'm sure that, you know, there are other people who had absolutely amazing experiences in El Nido, but just be aware that in places spoiled by tourism, such things are possible. In our case, for example, when we checked into the hotel, there was no toilet seat in the room, and upon us asking the staff to do something about this, they just kind of said that they can't, and if we don't like it, we can check out. I mean, what would you do if something like this happened? Well, despite the fact that, yes, El Nido is worth going, it is a really cool town, there's lots of touristy places, good coffee, great food, you know, very explorable, and there are also other islands to explore. One island of note that I want to mention is the Coron Island. It is up north. You do need to take a ferry there. It takes about 3 hours. We didn't do this, so this is just something to keep in mind. But because of the hotel experience, we didn't stay in El Nido for too long. We decided to just kind of leave that hotel. So we decided to go to Port Barton. Port Barton is about 3 hours away by car. And while we were going to Port Barton, we actually stopped by another interesting place, which is Taytay, or Taytay, or Taytay. Point is, there is a really interesting thing to see at Taytay, and it's this remains of this little tiny citadel. It's really not that big, but it is really cool. There is an old cannon there, there is a really beautiful view, and you can just kind of walk around and admire the whole area and imagine what it used to be like 500 years ago when it was built. So that's something to consider. So we came to Port Barton, and I really liked it. It's this little town with tourism just developing. There is, I mean, it used to be just like a little quiet fishing village from what I can imagine, but I think it's going to develop in the future. There is a fair share of expats there already. One of the spots that I absolutely loved there is the Milano Cafe, and it's this authentic Italian coffee place with Italian owners who open every season. They close down for the summer, I believe. They actually go back and forth to the Philippines from Italy to work on this cafe. It's kind of this little baby of theirs. So definitely, if you find yourself in Port Barton, check out the Milano Cafe. But what makes Port Barton really cool? First of all, it's the beach. However, the beach can sometimes be a little crowded with boats, and there are a few other beaches around. There's the Coconut Beach, and then there's the White Beach. Well, the problem with those two is sometimes there are locals who will demand money from you to see those beaches. Now, this is not exactly legal, to put it mildly, but they're there, and there will be conflict if you refuse to pay, so that's your choice. I don't know if I would do that. We actually didn't go to those beaches. One alternative what you can do is, instead of walking or taking a bike there, there is no asphalt, so taking a car there is not a good option. You can rent a bicycle or a motorbike in town. But one of the alternatives to avoid the people who will try to extort money out of you is taking a kayak and approaching these beaches from the sea. So that's a good way to see them. Now, there are a couple of other beaches to see a little out of town. One is called Gilligan's Fort, is a little northeast of town, and the other one is Long Beach, which there will be barely anybody there. So if you're not interested in seeing other people, other tourists, then definitely go there. Well, aside from these three spots, what makes Palawan unique and really cool is the nature there. Now, it is different from the rest of the Philippines. The flora and fauna there is actually more related to the flora and fauna in Borneo. Look up the Wallace Line. It's basically kind of a boundary that separates the fauna in the Philippines from the fauna in Borneo. Well, the island of Palawan is closer to Borneo, so you won't see the same kind of birds, plants, and animals in the rest of the country. After Palawan, we took a plane to Cebu, and from Cebu, we took a ferry to Bohol. Now, Cebu, we didn't really spend too much time in. We just kind of took a taxi to the port. However, there are a couple of things to see in Cebu. There is the old part of town, and there is a part of town that contains the Magellan Cross. And by the way, as I found out later, the airport that you fly in Cebu is located on the very same island where Fernando Magellan, or Ferdinand Magellan, depending on which version you prefer, was killed. And the island is called Mactan. From Cebu, we went to Bohol. There are a few reasons to come to Bohol. Bohol. One of our personal reasons is to get the last rabies shot for my wife Masha, who got bitten by a little cat a few weeks prior to that. I do have a video on that whole endeavor. Check it out. However, objective reasons to come to Bohol include, number one, the Chocolate Hills. Chocolate Hills are a really interesting geological formation. I'm not sure if anybody knows exactly why they exist. They are natural, and there are over 1,000 of them. And during the dry season, they turn this chocolate color. Even though we were there during the dry season, that dry season wasn't so dry, so the brown hills were green. But if you do get lucky, they do get brown. Another reason to come to Bohol is the Tarsier National Park. There are a few points where you can see the tarsiers. We went to this one, and there were 4 tarsiers on the spot. And when you go, you're supposed to stay really quiet because they are nocturnal animals. And by the way, tarsiers were the inspiration for Yoda. I don't know why you would need that fact, but it's just something to consider. Anyway, tarsiers are really cool and really worth seeing. Another place that I wanted to go, but we didn't really make it because it was raining quite heavily, so we decided against it, is the zip line and the river adventure. I don't know how touristy that is, but it could be worth seeing. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of that, but still. After Bohol, we took another ferry to Siquijor. Siquijor is known to Filipinos as kind of a witch island. This is where the famous Filipino healers come from, but that was not the reason we went there. We went there because it is a relatively undeveloped island, another place in the Philippines where tourism is just starting to bloom. The beaches there are absolutely gorgeous, especially near the Coco Grove Resort. If you can manage to get a room at Coco Grove, great. This is one of the coolest places to stay there. But even if you can't, there are a few spots to stay around there. But aside from the beaches, another really cool thing about Siquijor is the numerous waterfalls all over the island. They are all accessible, often by just a short hike from the main road. Some of them are pretty crowded, some of them are not. And there are over 7 or 8 really cool, really picturesque waterfalls that you can visit. Aside from the waterfalls, another cool thing to see if you're a fan of architecture is this church located to the south. It's called the Lazi or the Lazi Church. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. It is a newer church. It's not as old as some of the things in the Philippines, but it is a pretty one. It's definitely very picturesque, especially on the inside. I do recommend visiting it when you come to Siquijor. And not too far away from it is this really old banyan tree. We loved it. It's huge and it has kind of like this fairy tale feel to it despite the tourists around it. There's even a cafe nearby where you can have some coffee or just, some local food. After Siquijor, we went north. We went to the area called Bicol, which includes a few different islands, but we headed specifically to the southeastern part of the largest island in the Philippines, the Luzon Island, and the reason we went there is the Mayon volcano. I've been dreaming about coming to this place since I was a teenager, and the reason for that is because the Mayon volcano is one of the most symmetrical mountains in the world, akin to Fuji. However, we didn't really get too lucky with the weather, unfortunately. Despite the fact that we did go to a few nice points to see the volcano from, both times it was rather obscured by clouds. We did get sorta lucky on the second day, but if you decide to go there, give yourself some time and hope for some good weather because when it opens up, it is worth it. There are a few spots you can observe the volcano from, and one of those spots is called the Hobbit Hill. Now, the Hobbit Hill is one of the many spots in the world that's built to look like the Shire, the Hobbit village, of course, after the original one in New Zealand. But despite the fact that it's just a fan-made site for tourists, it's definitely a good view to take in the grandeur of the surrounding area. Another good spot to observe the volcano and see some architecture at the same time is the Legazpi Church, located in the town of Legazpi, which is the biggest city in the area. So you can kind of kill two birds with the same stone, look at the volcano, and explore some old colonial architecture at the same time. Of course, these two spots are not the only ones to observe the volcano from. You can ask around, ask the locals if there are any other viewpoints. Most Filipinos speak English, and in this particular area, this area is not too touristy, so a lot of people will be surprised to see you and will be very much willing to interact with you and be very curious, and I'm sure will be very happy to give you a few pointers. I know that I mentioned our negative experience in El Nido, but actually for the most part, like 90% of the time, the Filipinos were some of the friendliest, some of the most welcoming, some of the most smiling people that I've had the pleasure to interact with. One of the other reasons people come to this area, aside from the volcano, is the whale sharks. Now, if you go south of Legazpi to the area called Donsol, you can take the whale shark tour and swim with them. I didn't do that, but this is just something that I should mention if you are in the area. After Legazpi and the area around the Mayon volcano, we returned to Manila briefly, and then we went north to Ilocos Norte. Ilocos Norte. This area is extremely different from the rest of the country. It is far drier than the rest of the Philippines, and honestly, the whole landscape looks more like Spain than what you would expect the Philippines to look like. And I can see why the Spanish built some of their largest churches in Ilocos Norte or Ilocos Sur. But the main reason we came here was this gem. This town is called Vigan. But let me tell you first how we got here. This is all part of the very same island of Luzon where both Manila and the Mayon volcano are located, but this is the northwesternmost part. First, we flew into the town of Laoag. We thought it would be more interesting than it was. It's really a really busy town, but there are a couple of interesting spots here, namely this clock tower that just kind of stands there. You can't really explore it. It's just there and it's old. If you go north from Laoag, there's a couple of deserted beaches because nobody really ever comes to this area, and I don't know why, people really should. But if you do go north, there are a few beaches here, and another interesting spot that is located here is the wind farms. And partially, like I said, it is interesting because you're unlikely to see any other visitors here. In Laoag, we spent just one day and rented a car there and drove down to Vigan. There's no airport in Vigan, so if you do go there, this is probably going to be your route as well. Vigan is absolutely beautiful. This is also another UNESCO heritage site, and in my opinion, this is one of the coolest little towns in Southeast Asia. And this town is probably the least visited by foreigners. When we were there, we barely saw any foreign faces. Most of the tourists here are local. 99% of visitors are Filipinos from other parts of the country.
Mostly local tourists. Well, pretty much only local tourists. But it is charming, and there's definitely no crowds here. Not sure why yet, but I think partially it's because it's not like the easiest place to get to. Although it is pretty awesome. There's a lot of really cool stuff here. good restaurants, some great architecture, and the vibe. Vibe is the best part. Isn't that right? Huh? Yep, exactly.
There's a really particular vibe to the whole town with a bunch of horse-drawn calaces around. You can take one if you want to ride around in style. And another thing that's interesting about Vigan is the local food. They do have a bunch of dishes that are specific to this area. And well, if you like pork, definitely something for you to try. We spent a few days in this town and enjoyed it thoroughly. Walked around, it's very walkable, it's very pleasant, some great coffee here, pretty good food, a few museums, and if you have about 3-4 days, I think that would be a pretty perfect time to spend here. One of my favorite food spots in Vigan is actually this kind of hole-in-the-wall chicken place where they just roast chicken. It's just a couple of local guys that work there, and you know, if there is a line that forms to a certain place every day, you know it's worth it. Seriously, that chicken is amazing. So do check it out if you find yourself in that town. I should especially mention Vigan at night because when all those lights get turned on, it becomes a very different space. The vibe changes, it just kind of feels older and more ancient in the evening. So evening walks there, not only will they be more pleasant because partially this area is further north, so nights will be cooler, but the vibe, guys, seriously, it is absolutely different from the rest of the country. And I don't know any other place in Asia with a vibe quite like this. Now, of course, every place is unique, but what I mean is that there is a certain magic to this particular town. And I honestly don't know why there aren't more foreign tourists here because this place, to me, it feels like it should be more popular than it is. So Vigan itself is a UNESCO heritage site, like I said, but there's a couple other ones in the area, and these are the Church of Santa Maria, which is the main cathedral of Ilocos Sur. And personally, I think that church is beautiful. I really like the vibe here. It's really peaceful. It also looks very much like Spain, just like the surrounding area and the rolling hills around. But it's worth a visit. It's about an hour's drive from Vigan, so if you have a car, great. It's really easy to get there and explore. The other church is called the St. Augustine Church, also like the one in Manila, but this one is very different. Also is a UNESCO heritage site and is the main cathedral of Ilocos Norte. It has a very distinct shape, also quite beautiful, and is also very much worth a visit. And of course, the Philippines is a huge country. It is a very explorable country. There is a lot of places, a lot of things to see here. And what I mentioned in this video, this is probably not even 10% of what you can see in the Philippines. Next time I visit, I do want to see the island of Samar, and I do want to see some more volcanoes. Or another place to visit in Luzon that we didn't go to is the rice terraces. But because this area is far away from everything, it's not very accessible, it takes a long time to get here, and there is not a lot of anything else in the area, I decided to choose Vigan. There are more things to see around Vigan. Oh, and by the way, near the St. Augustine Church, there is technically speaking, it's the only desert in the Philippines, and it's the sand dunes. I really wanted to come here, but we were short for time, so we didn't make it here. But be aware that this area is just a short drive away from the main road between Laoag and Vigan. So this was our itinerary. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel, and check out my other videos as well. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and stay nomad.